Choose wisely, Apple's latest iPhone 16 Pro Max versus Samsung's flagship of the year, the Galaxy S24 Ultra. Out of these two devices, what gives you more value for your dollar, who is the performance king, and which is better for productivity? But most importantly, which one would I recommend? First thing, as with any comparison, let's go ahead and start off with the design. Both have a very different design language, and they might be the only two flagships these days that don't look identical. The S24 Ultra has a flat top and bottom with 90-degree edges and softer curved side rails that give the phone a very jaw-dropping, nearly uninterrupted front display with squared off corners. The iPhone, on the other hand, has flat sides everywhere and features a more soft corner radius with slight curves into the side rails, which does help a lot in terms of comfort. Coming around to the display, it is marginally larger than the S24 Ultras at 6.86 inches versus 6.8. Though in the hand, it doesn't actually feel that way, as Apple's dynamic island does still have a lot of presence on the 16 Pro Max. Now, I will say that this is obviously subjective, but in terms of comfort, the device that I find to be better for longer hours is the 16 Pro Max, and that's mainly due to those curved side rails, especially if you're to use either of these phones without a case. However, when it comes to consuming any sort of media, whether it be YouTube videos, playing games, or multitasking, which we will talk about later, I will say I do lean more toward the Samsung. Since we're here already, the display bezels on the iPhone are also thinner, and in person, they are shockingly thin. And though this is not a big deal and is not a reason that I would personally purchase a phone, it does even at times make the S24 Ultra's still impressive bezels look larger in comparison. But before we move on though, I just want to say thank you so much for the support you've been showing me recently on the channel. A like and a sub goes a very long way, and we're almost at 50,000 subscribers, and if we could hit that by the end of the year, I would really appreciate it. In terms of the build quality, both phones feel very premium in the hand. Both are using titanium in the side rails of the device, and both are nearly identical in weight, with the iPhone being 226 grams versus 233, a difference that you won't really be able to make out. The Galaxy S24 Ultra is using Corning Gorilla Glass Victus 2, which I found to be incredibly scratch resistant, showing no wear at all, even in terms of micro scratches. And the iPhone has Ceramic Shield Gen 2, which is supposedly 50% stronger. Look, I'm not jerry-rig everything, and I'm not gonna sit here and destroy these phones for your viewing pleasure, but what I can tell you is that at the end of the day, both seem to be very durable, and after owning the S24 Ultra for quite a while now, it's held up incredibly well. This really shouldn't be a deterrent for you to go with one or the other, as I think both Samsung and Apple have been excelling with this in their latest flagships. Okay, let's talk about something a little more interesting now. The S24 Ultra's 1440p AMOLED display refreshes at 1 to 120 Hz. It's tack sharp at 501 ppi, and is absolutely stunning. It has a very high 2600 nit peak brightness and is simply one of the best displays I've seen on a smartphone. The iPhone 16 Pro Max has a Super Retina XDR display with a 1320p resolution at 460 ppi and also refreshes between 1 and 120 Hz. However, the iPhone, oddly enough, actually undersells its brightness, claiming 2000 nits with last year's 15 Pro Max, though it was able to actually push beyond 2500. And despite the lower resolution and brightness, I think it stacks up quite fairly to the S24 Ultra in a lot of cases, and in my experience, even in the footage that you're going to see in this video, the iPhone is actually blowing its brightness out of the water. I noticed this a couple of hours ago when I was shooting B-roll, and the iPhone managed to stay brighter without dimming as well, which I think is kind of impressive. But the S24 Ultra also does something that no other phone has been able to replicate, and that's the anti-reflective coating. If you're someone who works outside in the sun or is outside for a majority of the day, Samsung's anti-reflective coating does a very good job at fighting reflections and makes the display way more legible in bright conditions, something that I simply wish every phone had. When it comes to the performance, both of these phones with their respective software, iOS and Android One UI, seem very snappy and are really smooth. However, with the iPhone on Apple's latest iOS 18, there are some signs of some weird stuff going on. There is a frustrating touch responsiveness issue that plagues a lot of applications and the overall fluidity and feeling of the actual device. Now, this happened even prior to me putting on a screen protector, so before you guys roast me about that in the comments down below, that isn't the issue. And even after updating to the beta, it is still there. So I'm kind of concerned at what the actual problem is and whether this is going to be fixed in a software update. Aside from that, which honestly probably will be fixed by the time you even watch this video, the hardware inside both these devices is really impressive. The Galaxy S24 Ultra is using the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy. It's a slightly overclocked, better binned version of the 8 Gen 3 specifically for the Samsung devices. It has 12 gigs of RAM and it's using the more efficient standard UFS 4.0. The iPhone 16 Pro Max now has Apple's latest and most powerful 3nm A18 Pro SoC with a very powerful NPU and support for incredible hardware ray tracing. The phone does only have 8 gigs of RAM, but memory has never been necessarily a huge concern when it comes to iPhone, as the memory bandwidth on the A18 Pro is quite high. The iPhone is also using the UFS 4.0 standard. Due to the new A17 Pro and A18 Pro SoCs, the iPhone is capable of playing AAA titles like Assassin's Creed and Resident Evil. Though I will say that the iPhone is more powerful on paper, and aside from gaming, doesn't necessarily deliver in areas that are more meaningful to the consumer. For example, the S24 Ultra can do split view multitasking with 2 applications, and you can even add another on top. Now, this might seem excessive, but split view is genuinely very practical. I use it all the time to keep YouTube on top of Twitter or Google on top of Google Docs if I'm trying to make notes on a script that I need reference for. I guess my point is that at the end of the day, the iPhone is more powerful, but it doesn't necessarily get to actually flex it. Now, I don't want to dive too deep into the AI features that Samsung's included because there's a lot, but Apple hasn't shipped any. Apple Intelligence is expected to come in March of 2025, and earlier, of course, if you're in the beta, as we've already started to see some stuff trickle down into the developer preview. But for the consumer, for the public, all of this power, the NPU that you were sold on, and the very long segment in Apple's announcements about Apple Intelligence, well, it's just kind of a moot point. Now, in the applications I frequent, like Lightroom, my productivity apps, and social media applications, there's no phone that really sticks out as being better in terms of performance. For games, a majority of them play similarly, though I do prefer the gaming experience overall on the iPhone. Despite the uninterrupted display of the S24 Ultra, I find most games, including Warzone Mobile, are just better optimized for the hardware, offering higher performance targets and visual fidelity. This does also work similarly to apps like Twitter and Instagram. Things like the iPhone's camera work much better in social media applications due to the optimization from developers on iOS. Though this is something that is slowly starting to change, and there has been noticeable improvements that Samsung's made working with app developers. So I would really like to come back next year and see how these devices stack up when it comes to that use case. So once again, so far it is kind of a toss-up between these two. Both phones do support Wi-Fi 7, both share Bluetooth 5.3, wireless charging, and they have the same IP68 water resistance rating. There's a couple of features unique to each phone though. In Samsung's case, it's the S Pen, a tool that I genuinely do find really practical. You can use it for many things like taking notes, sketching, and signing PDFs, but you can also use it as a remote shutter button for photos or video recording. You can use it for air gestures to do things like turn up or down the volume, and I will say that when I carry an Ultra device from Samsung, the S Pen sticks out for me as a tool and something that I'm genuinely happy that exists on this device. Now, Apple's included camera control. It's a button with a haptic sensor inside to simulate a half press on top of being able to fully click. This is something that I was hoping was going to be revolutionary for the iPhone, but it's turned out to be kind of a gimmick. The problem lies in 2 areas. It's very uncomfortable. The positioning of the camera button itself is supposed to work for your thumb and your index finger for shooting in landscape or portrait, but neither finger seems to be satisfied with where it's sitting. It's also just not as fast and simply not as intuitive as using the actual display to zoom or to take photos or start a recording. Now, I'm not entirely sure how this got past Apple's Sketchpad, but I will say I am kind of excited to see it develop a little bit more and see if there's areas in which this can improve upon. For me, it's now solely being used as a quick launch to bring up the camera, something that I could have just done on Samsung by double tapping the lock button. However, because of this, it's actually freed up the action button for me that I used to use to bring up the camera, and now I use it with the Shortcuts app to bring up some of my social media applications. Now, I want to make a comprehensive video talking about the camera features on both of these devices and giving you a deep dive into what they're actually capable of, because especially on the S24 S24 Ultra, there's a lot to cover. But quickly, the S24 Ultra has 4 main shooters: a 200 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, a 10 megapixel 3x telephoto, and a 50 megapixel 5x telephoto with a 12 megapixel selfie camera. The iPhone 16 Pro Max, on the other hand, has 3 lenses: a 48 megapixel main camera, a 48 megapixel ultra wide, and a 12 megapixel 5x telephoto with a 12 megapixel selfie camera. This is one of those areas in which the Samsung sounds dramatically better on paper, but the iPhone delivers in terms of the results. I've found the images on the iPhone to be noticeably better, with more consistent HDR, really nice sharpness, and good detail. It's better at being able to retain data in lower lit areas much more easily than the S24 Ultra. The Galaxy does tend to struggle in low light, though I do think it's improved since launch as Samsung continues to work on their image processing. The thing is that for most people, this is definitely a subjective thing, as some might like the more punchy, contrasted look that Samsung's going for versus the more flat, neutral images coming out of the iPhone. There are areas in which Samsung does better, like with edge detection in portrait photos, and there's definitely a plethora of fun and interesting things inside of the camera app, but I do prefer the iPhone in this section, especially for video. I mean, both look great, but the S24 Ultra is fantastic, and both are pretty much up to par with features. But I do feel as though the video coming out of the iPhone is just unbeatable, at least as of today. And after spending more time with the 16 Pro Max, I've really come to enjoy shooting on the new 48 megapixel ultra wide lens for video, as I'm able to get more in frame. The image looks great and it handles darker scenes very well. There's also a ton of apps and tools on the iPhone that are available for everyone, like Kino, allowing you to shoot in RAW, grade the image at the same time, whilst baking a color profile into your video so that you don't need to do any work in post. As a creator, it should be obvious that I do prefer the iPhone for video. But the S24 Ultras honestly shouldn't be discounted in any way. Now, as far as batteries go, the iPhone has a 4,685 milliamp hour battery, and the Galaxy S24 Ultra is using a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. Both devices support fast charging. Big emphasis with air quotes on the iPhones, as it only supports up to 30 watts, but the Galaxy S24 Ultra's 45 watts still looks a little silly compared to what's out there on the market today. As far as these two devices though, the Galaxy takes the clear win in charging speed. Anyways, the S24 Ultra can do 15 watts wireless charging, whereas the iPhone is capable of up to 25 watts with a MagSafe charger or 15 watts with a Qi 2 wireless charger. Though the Galaxy S24 Ultra can in fact do reverse wireless charging, which is a nice way to top up a pair of earbuds when on the go. Now, as far as battery life goes, depending on the apps and services you use, it's going to vary, and my numbers may not be relevant to you at all. But under light use, I can squeeze out about 9 to 10 hours on both of these devices depending on the day, with the iPhone slightly pulling ahead of the S24 Ultra. Now, despite the smaller battery, I think this is due to a more efficient SoC and the fact the iPhone standby drain is nearly non-existent. The first night that I had the 16 Pro Max, I charged it to 100% and I took it off the charger for the remainder of the night. I woke up to 100%. It was actually kind of crazy. There was literally no battery drain overnight. Now, I'm curious as to how the S25 Ultra is going to stack up here in February, considering that it is going to be using the Snapdragon 8 Gen 4. Now, at the end of the day, both of these devices, the Galaxy S24 Ultra and 16 Pro Max, are going to be amazing. It just depends on who you are and what you value. If you like to play around with customization, enjoy seriously tweaking your devices to make it yours, and like the freedom that comes with Android in the form of multitasking and sideloading, it's clear that the S24 Ultra is your pick. If you're someone who enjoys Apple's ecosystem, maybe already own an iPad or a MacBook, you could benefit from owning an iPhone and get some additional features out of your entire device lineup. Or if you're an individual in business and you can see yourself benefiting from the capabilities of something like the S Pen, the S24 Ultra definitely seems like a good choice. Same thing with iPhone. If you're a creative and make money on social media, or want to get started with TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram, it's one of the best devices to do so, in my honest opinion. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. If you stuck through it and did enjoy this one, leave a like down below, subscribe for more content, and before you go anywhere, if you've watched the remainder of this video, drop, I don't know, a snail emoji in the comments down below, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.